We'll start by talking about Chapter 4 of Getting to Yes. The authors caution us to avoid making premature judgments. Not only do you foreclose the possibilities of things you may not know about, in other words, there may be some great ideas and some great solutions you're simply not aware of, but also it sort of puts a damper on the whole exchange of ideas in the first place. You want to encourage the kind of behavior that will lead to greater gains on both sides. So you don't want to shut things down too quickly. Obviously, as you engage in a negotiation, you need to narrow down the possibilities, but first you need to consider what's possible. Avoid searching for a single answer or trying to solve everything all at once. It's possible that there is more than one good response. It's possible that some combination of different solutions may exist. It's possible that the best idea is to solve just a portion of it right now and to work on further solutions for other parts of the problem later on. But don't assume that it's one single event that needs one single answer. It's possible that's true. It's also probable that that's not true. So think more creatively about generating solutions and how those could get implemented. A common theme throughout Getting to Yes is the fallacy of assuming that the pie is fixed. And sometimes it's true and there's no way around it, but oftentimes you can expand the pie. Oftentimes you can create gains, and oftentimes you don't know what might be of value to somebody else. So it's possible that there's no further gains or wealth that could be created from a situation, but don't assume that. Go into it trying to find out what else might make the other parties be satisfied and be eager about engaging in a negotiation. Avoid thinking that solving this problem is their problem. Look at it from their perspective. What is it that they want? Come up with some solution that appeals to their self-interest. Most of us are pretty self-involved, and so we come up with solutions that suit our own needs. Try to think a little bit broader. What would meet the other party's needs? Oftentimes, for example, I'll get students coming to me and saying, please, professor, I need to add your class. I have to have this class to graduate. I have to have this class or I'll lose my visa. I'll have to have this class or I'll lose my student aid. I'm begging you, please. And without sounding too callous, after all that, oftentimes my response is, I know why you need me. Why do I need you? Sometimes they simply look shocked because they don't know how to think about it this way. They are so anxious themselves about what they need that they can't see any bigger than that. But what I'm trying to do is to get them to see the bigger picture. What do you have to offer me? Sometimes they just sort of look blank and think, I almost think they're going to offer to wash my car or something. Not that my car doesn't need it, but that's not where I'm going. Ask yourself, what does a professor want from a student? And with a quick-witted student, they'll get there. They'll say, because I'll come to class, I'll be prepared, I'll participate in class. What a professor wants from a student is that the class is better because that student was in there. What things could you say to a professor that would have them add you to this class? Now take that same idea to the last time you applied for a job. You really needed this job. You're focused on what you need. You need money. You need to move on. You need what you need, and you're not thinking, what does the employer need? What could I say to this employer that would solve some problem for them? It's not you being slimy or pushy or self-aggrandizing, but think about it from the employer's perspective. What problems do they need solutions to that you could help with? Frame it that way instead of it from a more self-centered way. Be careful when there's emotional involvement because it makes it more difficult for us to see the larger picture. Just recognize that emotional involvement hinders your ability to look at things in a more neutral manner. Brainstorming is when you get together with people and you just throw out ideas. What's possible? The idea of this is to just generate ideas because there may be something that you haven't thought of earlier, and this may lead to some real creative collaborations. If you want a successful brainstorming session, limit the purpose. In other words, not how could we be better, how could this organization improve, but something specific. How could we shorten the time for distribution of the product to the wholesaler? What could we do to shorten that time? In other words, give some specific goal for that setting. Otherwise, you may just have one big amorphous discussion that kind of goes all over the place and no place at the same time. Limit the number of participants. Too many people and you won't get meaningful contributions from everybody. And you'll sometimes get strange dynamics among different people. If you're able to do it, change the environment. You probably noticed yourself, it's awfully hard to get something done in a familiar environment because you have constant interruptions and things that you need to do and things that have to be taken care of, things that distract you. In fact, that's not bad. A solution for a lot of your work problems is if there's some task you really need done, leave your familiar place, go someplace else where you're not going to be distracted and see if you can't get it done. Choose a facilitator and a secretary. A facilitator is simply someone who is going to make sure everyone is heard. They're going to paraphrase everyone's contributions to make sure that they get understood and recorded. They're going to ask participants if we can't think about how these ideas work together. Having an outside facilitator, if you're able to do that, can be really helpful because we are also limited by our experience with an organization that it's sometimes hard for us to see creative new solutions. We get kind of hemmed in by what we know historically has happened. And have a secretary, and by that I don't mean drag some poor clerical in there to take notes, but instead someone who's a participant, ask them to take notes. This serves a really good purpose because the secretary then can help in an organized fashion list the ideas that people have, and that process by itself helps you realize, well, wait, these two ideas are really the same thing, let's combine them. Or this one would work much better, more synergistically with another idea. Why don't we do that? In other words, a good secretary, once you start listing things, helps you see that you're developing in a particular way. When people are working in groups, especially when I advise MBA students, my advice is sit down, choose someone to be the secretary, have that person open up even an email, to start an email message, copying everybody, and just start making a list of what everyone's agreed to or what everyone's contributing. Read it back. Almost without fail, something didn't get recorded, or the meaning got changed, or it wasn't clear, or the person wanted to clarify what they were saying. So reading back the summary to everyone there helps clarify it. If this is something like tasks that need to be completed, go ahead and put in deadlines for that. Most of us are very deadline driven, and if we don't have a deadline, it's pretty hard to get things done. So put deadlines in there, and even better, put padded deadlines in there. A padded deadline is give yourself a little more time. So if the drop dead deadline is Monday, do yourself a favor, have a longer life by not being so anxious. Tell yourself and your group, okay, it's due Saturday. That way, if you're padding the deadline. If something comes up, some sort of setback, it's not the end of the world. You still have a couple more days to get this done. Try to start finishing things earlier rather than running right up to deadlines. You really have a much more peaceful life. And I tell you, as somebody who's struggled with this in the past, you'll just have a much calmer life if you do this. Then, once everyone agrees on the summary, the secretary can hit send and everyone has a copy of it right away. When you're brainstorming, one notion of, and not just with brainstorming, frankly, but in a lot of negotiations, if it seems like people are maybe not going to be as cooperative as possible, instead of sitting across from someone, try sitting next to someone. William Ury talks about this in his TED Talk that we'll be listening to later. But it's you, instead of taking a physically confrontational approach, sitting side by side is one that sort of has you, even subconsciously, working together rather than in opposition. Clarify the ground rules. Decide what, if you want some ground rules. Common ground rules include nobody speaks twice until everyone has spoken once. I'm not saying that you want that rule. I'm saying think about what rules you have that help further your goals. You don't want to have premature criticism because you want, in a brainstorming, to get people to really come up with ideas freely without being immediately shot down. Most ideas in brainstorming won't work. It's not the purpose to come up in the very beginning with the perfect conclusion. You need to be able to throw out some ideas just to get everyone thinking more creatively. A good idea for brainstorming is post all the ideas in some way that everyone can see them. If you have whiteboards or some sort of something to post them on around a room, that's great. If you haven't already seen them, there's some sticky notes that are huge, like 2 by 3 feet or 3 by 4 feet, and they don't harm the wall, and you can stick them up all around the wall, and then in real large print, just write down people's ideas. When you're trying to figure out preferences, one idea is to give people a certain number of stickers and say, put the stickers on the ideas that appeal to you most. You'll see whole groups of people start channeling themselves into patterns for things that seem more desirable. What ideas look like they're the most feasible and productive. Look through the eyes of different experts. We all tend to be colored by our own expertise, but try to think, how would someone else view this? How would someone in manufacturing in your organization, how would they view it? How would the sales staff view it? How would a tax attorney view it if you have the expertise for that? How would your accountant view this? In other words, try to look through different perspectives, not just your own. We've spoken before about how agreements don't have to be the whole hog right now. You can work out partial agreements. It's easier to not start something that isn't going to work out successfully than to stop it once it's started. It's really useful to identify shared interests. They are latent in every negotiation. We're usually focused on what interests we have that conflict with someone we're negotiating with. So when I'm buying a car from you, I want to pay the least amount possible. You want me to pay the most amount possible. We tend to focus on the tension of that. But we have some shared interests. Focus on what those are. Shared interests are opportunities, and if you identify them and articulate them, it can help parties move forward. Instead of focusing on where they differ, they focus on where their notions are the same. And it makes the negotiation much more amicable. If you can, especially articulating it, people will change completely if you simply say, okay, but our goal is to increase customer satisfaction. Okay, so how can we tailor these proposals so that meets the goal? Once you do it that way, parties can sort of let go of any defensiveness they may have and stay focused on what we can do together. And so maybe then it won't be the engineers fighting with the salespeople. Maybe you get less in the way of turf wars and more in the way of working towards the common goal. Make the other person's decision easy. if it's hard for you to imagine what would look easy to them, just pick one of those participants and say, from their perspective, how what would make me, if I were that person, what would make me say, okay, yes, yes, I'm on board? Ask yourself, what am I wanting from this other party? Am I asking for some sort of statement? Am I asking them to sign a contract? Am I asking for some particular performance on their part? It's easier not to start a troubled solution than it is to stop it once it's started. Things tend to keep going once they've gotten started. And so a partial solution to tide you over until you can come up with a more long-term solution, that's not a failure. That might be your biggest success. Can you write down their option as a yesable proposition? In other words, it's easy for them to say yes, or the default will be yes. Make their decision easy. Years ago at my university, the faculty were coming up with some new curriculum ideas, and it was very controversial for reasons that we don't need to go into now. But I'll tell you, there were just very strong feelings on both sides. There was a committee that worked on this for about 2 years and came up with their proposal. Again, the proposal was very controversial. They presented their proposal in a faculty meeting. At the end of that proposal, they said, here's your choice. You can vote yes on this, or you can vote no and then come up with a new committee that will work on this problem for another 2 years. Well, that kind of changes things, doesn't it? Because if all you'd said is vote yes or no, do you like this or you don't like it, you'd get plenty of people saying, no, I don't like it. But if your alternative is, okay, if your answer is no, then we need to start over from scratch, and we're telling you, we're bright, hardworking people, we worked on this for 2 years, we're not saying you can't come up with something better, but you're going to have to do that. So are you willing to commit to that? All of a sudden, the proposal sailed through with just a very little debate because the authors made it a yesable proposition. Consider how you can do that in your own lives. You can't make it a yesable proposition unless you look through the perspectives of others. And you can't look through their perspective until you know what it is. So be more open, be an investigator, be aware of other people's experiences, preferences, and goals.